My name is Katie Ernst, and I am on the planning team for this Oasis conference and co-director of the Mission Institute. And I get the pleasure of introducing Isaac Everrett, who is the director of CRESH, which is an intentional community. I also had the pleasure of building a community with Isaac in Boston. So I'd love to hand it over to Isaac and hear from him about what he's up to in intentional community.
Wow, Katie, I had no idea you were going to be introducing me. And congrats on getting ordained. That's really, really exciting. I'm honored to have been able to be a part of it. Yeah, I'm Isaac Everett, and I have worked in various kinds of young adult ministries for a while. I've worked for the chaplaincies at NYU and Columbia and MIT. I've hosted Episcopal Service Corps Fellows for about a decade or so, and now I lead this organization that creates intentional communities here in Boston. And the reason that I absolutely love this work is one of the things that I found over and over again in those situations is that although churches, by and large, are really good at welcoming baby boomers and pretty good at welcoming young families, our parishes, by and large, aren't great at welcoming young, especially young single, young queer folks, folks who are fresh out of college, fresh out of military service or something like it. And in a way, I think almost maybe our chaplaincies are too good, because the experience that I have had in college chaplaincy is that they're beautiful, loving, justice-oriented places where people's voices are heard and valued and celebrated, and where worship is interesting and interactive and dynamic and relevant. And it's almost like the first season of Game of Thrones, right? Where you're watching and you're like, this is amazing. And then halfway through season 4, you're like, I was sold a bill of goods. And I think that's something of what young adult ministry is like in the Episcopal Church. We did a survey here in Massachusetts last year where we were looking at folks who were part of our young adult communities, and by and large, people loved it and raved about their experiences, but it didn't necessarily translate into a lifelong engagement with the Episcopal Church. When you ask young adults in Boston anyway, what they're looking for when they show up in church, you usually get some sort of variation of like, well, I need an affordable place to live. There's a housing crisis going on. I need a loving and supportive community, and I need to be able to live my life in alignment with my values, which are seemingly further and further distant from the values of this world. So that is what led us to CRESH, which I will share my screen here. So CRESH is the Charles River Episcopal Co-Housing Endeavor. It's a network of long-term, affordable, and intergenerational, faith-rooted, intentional communities. And it's our effort to try to give people the things that they're actually asking us for, because our tradition is really well-equipped to meet these needs. We have centuries of monastic wisdom about living together as a spiritual practice. And to be perfectly honest, the Episcopal Church has more real estate than it necessarily needs. My own diocese has sold about 15 parishes in the last 12 years. These two things make the church uniquely positioned to address the housing crisis and the loneliness crisis, all while building up the beloved community of God. My own journey into intentional community started about a decade ago with a small group from The Crossing. It's a congregation that I used to lead here in Massachusetts. And we met weekly to pray, and out of those prayers came a dream of living together, not quite as a monastery, not quite as a dormitory, but like a chosen family. And it completely changed my life. Over the course of the last decade, I became an Episcopalian, and then I became an Episcopal priest. And because we kept getting way more applications to live with us than we could possibly accept, I now run an organization that replicates that dream for other people. And we founded 4 intentional communities in 4 years, each one affiliated with an Episcopal parish in partnership, serving a neighborhood, building the beloved community on earth. And CRESH is teachers, CRESH is students, CRESH is nonprofit administrators, journal editors, chaplains, bank auditors, childcare providers, folks who are underemployed, unemployed, folks who are overemployed, folks who make $12,000 a year, people who make over $150,000 a year. We've got folks forging deep, intimate connections with one another, intertwining their lives across significant differences that usually keep us apart. It's maybe the most potent vision of beloved community that I've ever experienced. This shot was taken by one of our folks out of the window of another of our crash households. This one's in Newton Center. And he described it, the feeling of waking up every day and being greeted by this gorgeous, visible sign of Christian community every morning, first thing. And it's why when Isaac Martinez asked me to do this, I called it coming home to church, because although we tend to use church and parish as synonyms nowadays, and in the New Testament, churches are households, right? Like the home is where church happens. And that has never been more clear to me than during this COVID crisis. It was fascinating to me to watch Passover and Easter happen in the middle of the quarantine, and how differently Jews and Christians in my circles responded to that. Because Passover is a home-centered holiday. Like the Talmud is full of stories of people having seders in caves or wherever they needed to do it. Whereas in Christianity, we don't have anything like that. Over the centuries, we've moved everything that really matters to our communal spirituality out of the home and into the church building. So when so many people were trying to figure out how do we gather virtually for Triduum, I watched Crash's intentional communities become churches, like all on their own, with no guidance from me, certainly. And washing each other's feet, cooking meals, building crosses out of spare lumber so they could venerate. Like, it was amazing. And over again, I heard from them that it was the most meaningful, transformative Easter experience that they'd ever had, coming home to church. Intentional community, it's about reorienting our lives. It's about cultivating discipleship in ourselves and in each other. But it's not just inwardly focused. Each Crash household has some form of outward facing mission, some way that we benefit the neighborhoods around us. This is the Emmanuel House, another of our Crash houses, and it's located actually in a closed parish that shut down a little over a decade ago. And they turned this tragically neglected courtyard full of extremely sad shrubbery into a beautiful community garden. They grow herbs and vegetables. They have like scissors stick out for people to take stuff with them. They built garden beds for their neighbors to work in. It's become an unofficial dog park and a picnic spot for the neighborhood. It's a neighborhood that's tragically starved for green space. And in my own intentional community, our mission is hospitality. And we reserve a single bedroom for long-term guests, which is, for the duration of the COVID crisis, been occupied by a college student who was booted off campus when the virus hit along with everyone else, but didn't feel safe going home because their parents are homophobic. And being able to offer someone free housing for months on end in the middle of Boston, it's just a really good feeling. And I highlight these things because Jesus said that we can know true and false prophets by the fruit that they're bearing. And this is our fruit. This is the fruit of intentional community. The last piece I wanted to highlight is that, unlike the Episcopal Service Corps or other forms of intentional communities you might know, our intentional communities are intergenerational. They skew young, but the two fastest growing age groups in Boston are actually 20 to 34 and 65 plus. Young millennials and aging boomers, who have a surprisingly large amount of things in common. They both tend to have small household sizes. They tend to have limited incomes. They report feelings of social isolation. And this makes intentional community really attractive to both groups and makes them surprisingly compatible as roommates. So this is Alice, who's part of the Crossing House, our third intentional community. And she's an empty nester who recently went through a pretty painful divorce and was expecting to lose a lot of her stuff, but wasn't really expecting to lose her social networks, but she did. And she approached me at an event that we threw at MIT and said, I really want to live in intentional community. I want to make my home available for this. And it just completely clicked with the 20-somethings who moved in with her. And the vibrancy of that community and the wisdom sharing across generations is just powerful to behold. So there's a lot more to say about intentional community, about the importance of household worship, about the needs of young adults in this economy and this world, but that's going to be my time. So I invite you to join me later for the breakout group.